So is everyone going to keep their camera off? That's totally fine if you are. I just didn't want to start until I knew that you guys were all ready. Okay, I'm just going to assume that we are doing it that way. So my name is Beth Deatherage, and I am the CEO of Momenta. And we are a marketing firm with offices in Martinsville and Danville. But today I'm going to talk to you about virtual fatigue, which I know I normally do marketing type classes, so this is a little different. I'm going to share my screen with you because I have a little presentation. Can everyone see that? Great. So I am not an expert on virtual fatigue by any means, but the way I got into it is the National Alliance for Mental Illness reached out to me and asked me if I would consider teaching a workshop on it, because I, like many other people, went fully remote during the pandemic. And my son also went fully remote for virtual schooling. And so I had to kind of balance those two things. And they knew that I didn't mind public speaking. So I did a lot of research on it. And as I was doing the research, I was like, oh, I have this virtual fatigue. And I bet a lot of other people do also. And so I just thought it would be worth talking about it and educating people about kind of it is a real thing. Working from home sounds amazing and there's a lot of benefits to it, but there are also some downsides. So we're going to talk about it. If you have any questions, this is a super small group, so feel free to send them in the chat box and I'll try to answer them as we go. And if I don't know the answer, then I will get back to you independently, go out and find it and then get back to you. So this is sort of what virtual fatigue looks like. For me, it's slightly different because I don't always work at a desk. Sometimes I work at the table and sometimes I work in my bed. So, but you kind of get the point. And virtual fatigue is defined as the exhaustion you feel after any form of virtual interaction. So, after you have a meeting, whether it's Zoom or Google Meets, some people call it Zoom fatigue, then, do you feel more tired than if you had that meeting in person? And there are some common indicative behaviors. So you may not think you have it, and then I might read these to you and you might be like, oh, I kind of do. Do you find yourself trying to avoid, cancel, or reschedule meetings? Is there a day where you're like, I just can't bear to get online, so let me move it? Or do you try to book them all in one day so that you can get a break on a day? Do you feel tense or tired after virtual meetings? I love public speaking. I enjoy listening to people listen to what I have to say. I think that's a great feeling. But always before a virtual meeting starts, I kind of feel a little anxious. And do you find it harder to multitask? So if these are things that you experience, then that's a sign that you could be suffering from it. Symptoms. So this is kind of exactly where I kind of felt like I knew that I had a little bit of it. Apathy, which is feeling indifferent or lacking emotion. Do you just not feel excited about it? Do you not feel unexcited about it? Are you not feeling angry? Like it's just like a void of emotion, which is kind of a scary, dangerous place to be. Exhaustion. Are you tired? This doesn't mean just after you have the meeting. Do you feel tired all day because you're doing so much online and it's draining you in a different way? Forgetfulness. Do you not remember what you talked about because you weren't able to effectively engage because of other elements? Sometimes I start talking and I forget what I'm saying mid-sentence. Do you have difficulty concentrating? It's a lot easier to be distracted during a virtual meeting. We're going to kind of talk about why and how you can avoid it. Irritability. Are you easier to get angry? I know sometimes like my son, he's 8, will run in and I'll be like, what are you doing? I'm on a meeting, because it's just like a natural instinct. And then physical discomfort. Are you in actual pain? Are you having a hard time sleeping? You know, you're sitting all day, you're sitting in front of this computer, and that can be bad for you. So what are some of the virtual challenges? Social cues is one of the biggest ones. It's really hard to interpret if people are, one, even paying attention, right? If they're enjoying it. I love doing in-person classroom workshops because I get to play off the audience, right? I can ask questions and I can see smiles and we can laugh. And when I make a mistake, it's a joke. But on this, everybody's on mute. Half of you, I can't see your face. So like I have no way to gauge if I'm putting you to sleep or if I'm giving you anything useful. And so that's hard. It makes it very difficult. Appearance, this is challenging. So like we're already concerned how we look when we go to work, right? But now we have a reminder of our faces looking at us back the whole time. And often we end up looking at ourselves more than the person that's talking or the screen that's being shared because we're concerned about it. And then on top of it, we have to be concerned about our background. You know, does our space look nice? Does our home look clean? I have overcome that by just throwing up this background, which y'all can all be grateful for because my space is not clean and my house looks like something exploded because we're in the middle of a move. And you would judge me heavily if you could see it. Eye contact, you know, you're supposed to make eye contact with people when you're talking to them, but you can't possibly do it through Zoom. So it just feels like you just feel disconnected. Home life interference, as I said before, my son will come in, or even before I did this meeting today, I went to my parents and my fiance and I said, do not text me from 12 to 1 because I knew I'd be sharing my screen and I can't figure out how to not make my messages pop up. And so it just adds like some stress. And we've all been on the call where somebody's kid came in crying or the dog was barking, and it's distracting for you as the person watching it, but it's also extremely stressful for the person it happens to, right? They're like, I'm so sorry, but that's just part of life. And that's part of working remote. Technology challenges are a big deal. Depending on where you live in the county, you may or may not have great internet. And so sometimes I did a workshop for Patrick Henry Community College talking about virtual homeschooling. And literally, as I was closing up, like trying to wrap it up, my internet just disconnected completely. So I just left the meeting. So instead of having like a gracious closing, I just turned it off. I mean, I just looked like I turned out completely. That's embarrassing, especially if you're the leader, but it's embarrassing for anyone. And also the give and take. So if you are having a conversation via Zoom and a person's delayed like 3 times and you start to talk over them and then it comes back and then you're like, oh, sorry. And then that creates just a really disconnected conversation. And limited commentary. Like we said, I would prefer to be in a classroom where you could all talk to me. And that's just difficult to do on Zoom. So I am impressed with how some groups, including the chamber, have implemented the chat tool and the breakout sessions to allow for some of that engagement, but it's still not the same as an in-person event. So what I thought was really important is to look at how it affects different types of people, because we have extroverts and introverts, and you would think that an introverted person might prefer a Zoom relationship. And the true definition of an introvert is someone who not necessarily isn't good with people or doesn't like being around people. They do oftentimes, but they feel tired from it, right? I am 100% an extrovert. So when I go into a group, I could be feeling tired or sluggish, but when I leave, I feel better. I have more energy from it. I like suck the energy out of the group. But an introvert's the opposite. So they might still seem very sociable and they might be very engaging, but when they leave, they feel tired. And that's sort of the definition. But it turns out both personality types just prefer in-person socialization, and it's better for them, but for different reasons. So for extroverts like me, we need body language. Extroverts are good at reading social clues. If people are bored or uninterested or angry or disappointed, that's typically a strength an extrovert has, and Zoom removes that ability. It requires more focus. So extroverts also, I know I'm very guilty about this, can kind of be all over the place in their thinking, right? Like moving a lot of different ideas at one time. And in Zoom, you really need to be able to focus because you don't have multiple crowd to play off of. And it's hard to recover when you miss something, right? So if I'm in a workshop with someone and you ask me a question and I miss it, I can probably just punt it to someone else and it not seem like such a big deal. Or on like a Zoom call, I would have to just admit, I have no idea what you're saying. Can you please repeat it? And it's less rewarding because, like I said, we gain energy from human stimuli. So we don't get that same energy burst that we would if we were meeting in person. And also we prefer a less controlled environment. I like to be able to just talk when I want to talk. You know, I don't want to have to raise my hand or be in a chat room. I just want to say it before I forget it, because then I'm going to jump to the next thought. And so those are just some of the challenges for extroverts. Introverts also prefer to meet in person, but their challenges are different. So it turns out introverts are just like more critical on themselves in general. And their social performance. So they're easily embarrassed. So if they are the person that the dog barks during their meeting or their child comes in and interrupts, it's a lot harder on an introvert than it is on an extrovert. And it's harder for them to recover. It just creates more stress. They like personal space. So even though in person you might get touched on the shoulder or you might hug some people, they can control their distance. But in a Zoom, it feels like everyone's looking at you when you're talking. And so that can be hard on an introverted personality. They prefer smaller groups. One-on-ones are preferable. And some Zooms have been huge. I was on one earlier this year that had 75 people on it. And I couldn't see all 75, but I knew they could see me when I was speaking. And so that can be really hard on the introverted personality. And then those same online challenges, like thoughts and pauses, are more challenging online, and an introverted person is more likely to stop and think about what they say. Unlike me, that will just say what the first thing that comes to mind without worrying about the consequence. And so that can create a little bit of downtime, a little lag, and that can sometimes make people feel uncomfortable. There are groups that are more high risk for virtual fatigue. And so this is something to keep in mind. And I'm telling you all this, not just to know about yourself, but also think about the people that you're working with. So if you can control the environment for a team of people, these are things that you should be aware of. So essential workers, it's harder on them. Anyone that provides an essential service does not have flexibility in their job. So remote working, they have to be online from 8 to 5, right? That they're a social worker, that's when their job is allocated. They have to be at certain meetings at certain times, which means even if they don't feel good, or if they're having one of their stressful days, they don't have the flexibility some other remote jobs have. They have to show up. And so with all these added stresses from working remote, that's just one more stress, is that they can't control their time. Parents of school-aged children having to wear multiple hats. So hopefully we won't face this as much in the fall. You know, it seems like people are starting to get back out in the world. And although a lot of businesses are going to continue to offer virtual and remote working jobs, children do look like they're going back to school. But during this pandemic, it's been extremely challenging for people that also had to virtually homeschool their child and try to do their job. You know, it's like doing 2 jobs in one. Women, just in general, are typically more self-conscious about being on video. So men, you can't say all men, but men typically do not care as much about their appearance, or, you know, they have significant confidence. And so women just in general are more concerned about how do I look, how do I appear, which is great about Zoom because it has the forgiveness filter. We can all like know our wrinkles are kind of hidden, and my freckles are hidden. And so sometimes it makes me feel better than if I went in person. And then a shared workspace. So if you're working remote and you have a house and you have an office, that's great. You should be perfectly comfortable. But not everybody has that luxury. So they might be sharing a table in their kitchen or their dining room with their child that's also virtually learning, or with their husband that's also now remotely working. And that makes it more difficult when you don't have your own space and can't find your own groove. What is really scary about these high risk groups is some people fit in all of them. So you could be an essential worker who is a parent with a child learning at home that is a woman in a shared co-working space. So if just one of these groups is more high risk, imagine if you fell under all 4 categories. Like if you have that friend, that's the friend you should check on. There are some coping tips. If you think that you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally guilty of this, like I definitely feel tired, I definitely don't want to get on the Zoom call, then here's some things you can do to try to make it better. So skip live meetings. You know, if you're not comfortable doing the live workshop, or if that makes you feel worse, then wait, don't join it. Watch the video recording version that comes later. The Chamber's been really good about offering those. The last workshop I did on virtual fatigue, that's all I had to give was a recorded version. And then people came and asked questions later. So if that makes you more comfortable, then do it that way. But take the time to watch it, because sometimes we're really guilty about missing out on information if we don't force ourselves to go to the live meeting. Then we never come back to it. Take a break. If, you know, managers and groups should try to keep Zoom meetings to a minimum length. But if it's too long for you, or if you start to feel bad, don't be afraid to walk away. You know, make it like turn off your camera, mute yourself, and just take that break. You're totally allowed to do that. I know some people have been doing trainings for like 8 hours a day online. I can't imagine. So, you know, take the break. People will understand. Turn off the video. This group seems okay with that. So turn off the video whenever possible. Turn it off if it makes you feel comfortable, but keep in mind that it also creates more of a barrier for the person presenting, because they're already struggling with that kind of, how do I read my audience? So, you know, find the balance that works for you. Force, if you're leading it, try to make it fun. That's so hard to do. I struggle with this one too. We do team meetings every week. And so we kind of have a system where we tell something, each person tells what's happened in their life, like a little anecdote that's not work related. And then we talk about wins and challenges and then projects. But, you know, do games. If you're spending a lot of time on doing virtual stuff for work, maybe do something fun virtually, like a cocktail hour with your friends that don't live locally, or a trivia night. The key is to not make everything feel like a burden that's virtual. Audio meetings. I think people got so comfortable with Zoom and we got so excited about all this technology and people finally catching up to it that we're like using it for everything. But every meeting doesn't have to be a Zoom, right? Don't replace a phone call with a Zoom just because you can. Don't replace an email with a Zoom just because you can. It's a time waster. It's just one more pressure on you. So I know we're excited about it. It's a great tool. And if you want to share screens and stuff, it's important. But if I can just tell you over the phone, that's faster, it's easier, it's less stressful, and you're less likely to get worn out from the Zooms that you do need to have. And adjust your schedule. Schedule virtual meetings when you feel most comfortable. So Maddie and I were talking about this prior to starting the workshop. I am not a morning person. So I try not to schedule any Zooms prior to 10 a.m. because I know I'll feel comfortable. Now, it doesn't always work out that way because I have to schedule around my clients, but I try when I can. And I also try not to schedule them past 4 in the afternoon. So I try to use that time where I think I'm my best to do them. And if you have the ability to do that, you should. If you manage a team and you see that they do better during a different time of day, keep that in mind when scheduling their meetings. Incorporate physical activity. I knew after just a few weeks at home when the pandemic first started that this was going to be a problem for me. And not because I'm a super athlete, but because prior to the pandemic, I left my office a lot to go meet with clients, to check on them, to run errands. I make deliveries. So I didn't sit at a desk all day. And when we went into lockdown, sitting at a desk all day was really hard for me. So I started changing it up pretty immediately. So now I walk every day. I even my fiance purchased a mobile desk for me. So I can put my desk on my treadmill and I can walk while I still work. You can't walk quite as fast as you could otherwise if you don't want to kill yourself. I'm very clumsy, but it helps immensely because I get that physical activity. I feel like I'm doing stuff, but you don't have to commit to like a 3-mile walk. You can do something really, really small. Take multiple breaks, walk outside, get your vitamin D, implement 10-minute mini workouts, and like I invest in a standing desk. Mine's not a standing desk, it's a mobile desk. So I can take it to the bed, the couch, the treadmill. They're super inexpensive. I highly recommend them if you work remote a lot. Define your spaces. I'm still not great about this one because I still kind of work everywhere because I get tired. I get bored in one room and I'm like, oh, I'm going to switch rooms. But if you make your workspace feel like your workspace, then you're less likely to hate it. So keep your workspace and your relaxed space separate. Not everybody has that luxury. You might live in a studio apartment. You just have to make do with how you can. If you can't change your spaces, if you can't dedicate a room and say, this is where I work so that I can leave it, then you can change your clothes, right? Wear your work clothes and then change into your relaxed clothes. One of the reasons this piece is so important is because a lot of times when we work remote, we continue to work, right? We don't follow the strict 8 to 5 hours or 8:30 to 5, whatever your office format is. When we physically go to a place, we don't feel guilty about leaving at 5, but when we're home, we just keep on working. We're also more likely to work through our lunches without realizing it. And we just don't, and we're also not taking those 15-minute water cooler breaks where we just have conversations. So it's important to make sure you leave your workspace and really create your home space. And avoid back-to-back. So you schedule your meetings if you still had to travel. When you're not working remote and you have to go see clients, then if a client is in Pittsylvania County, another client's in Danville City, then you have drive time. So if nothing else, you have downtime just getting from one location to the other. This is especially true for some of those essential workers like social workers that started doing their meetings online. You need that decompression time. So when you're booking your meetings, then you should book them pretending that you have to travel in between. Allow yourself to have a break, allow yourself to go to the restroom or grab a snack or do your 10-minute mini workout. Now, the alternative to that could be if you would rather knock out 5 meetings on Wednesday so that you don't have to do any meetings on Thursday and Friday, that's fine too. Find what works best for you, but this is just like a standard recommendation. So the manager impact is important. So a lot of the things I tell you, you may not be able to control. You may not be able to control your schedule. You may not, or your meeting time, or when you get to go, when you get to come. We have instituted super flexible hours. We're fully remote and we plan on staying fully remote, but we still have our offices in Danville and Martinsville. But so if one of the employees or the team wants to work 9 to 11 and then take a break and then finish up in the evening, that's fine now that we're remote, right? We don't need you to be, we're not saving the world. We're not in an operating room. We got to be there from a certain time. We can give some flexibility. If you are a manager and you can give some flexibility, I strongly encourage that too. But things that you can do as a manager is minimize the virtual meetings. This goes back to don't make an email a Zoom meeting. That's crazy. People can still email and you can still respond via email, even though Zoom is a tool. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that could just be wrapped up a lot faster. Don't surprise schedule. That is the worst because maybe you're the person that works remotely without doing your makeup or changing your clothes or your hair's in a messy bun. And the last thing you want is for your manager or your boss to be like, hey, can we get on the phone really quickly? On the Zoom really quickly? Like, no, we can't get on the Zoom really quickly. I look awful. I look awful because I had a clear day today. So I allowed myself to look awful. Be cognizant of people and that is a real thing. Another thing that my team implemented during the pandemic was a tool called Discord. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of very similar to Slack as far as you can create a group for your team and each person has their name and you can text them, but more importantly, you can have an audio conversation with them, and that's what Slack does not have. And so if I want to have a conversation with someone on my team, just a quick 2 minutes, I can do that without sending them a Zoom link and they don't have to see me. Also through Discord, I can share my screen without them having to see me or send them a Zoom link. So that's a tool that's out there that can really improve remote interaction. Consider team-wide quiet hours. So it turns out like a lot of Fortune 500, especially in the Silicon Valley type companies, were already doing kind of quiet hours prior to the pandemic, where it says, we spend so many hours a day in meetings that when do we do our real work, right? I'm sure we've all had a day where you spent every second in a meeting and you're like, oh, great, now I got to go do my actual job because I just spent all that time in a 4-hour meeting that could have been done in 20 minutes possibly. So quiet hours is the idea that we will not schedule a meeting during, say, 10 to 12 every day. From 10 to 12, you do not have to take any meetings. That's 10 to 12. You get to work specifically on the to-dos of your job, right? The tedious things where you got to check the list off. And that's a great idea. I think even post-pandemic, even if you're back in the office, this is something to consider offering your team so that they know they have that dedicated time every day. Provide an agenda. It would be nice to know what we're going to talk about at the meeting before we come so that we can come prepared. Even more so, stick to the agenda. I have had a few people that have complained that, they go to a meeting thinking it's going to be about one thing and they've prepared for that one thing. And then the meeting turns into a totally different agenda, a totally different conversation. They're all caught off guard and they didn't have time to prepare for it. That's really easy to do. So, and that's very stressful for people. So provide an agenda, stick to the agenda. If you determine in a meeting that you do need to switch courses, then schedule another meeting or send an email. Follow start and end times. The chamber's been really good about this too. I've seen in their events. So like if it starts at noon, it starts at noon. And if it ends at 1, it ends at 1. Try to be cognizant of that, especially because people are booking a lot of them, but also because people need to plan their day. And so don't turn a 30-minute meeting into a 90-minute meeting because it messes up with everybody's schedule. And do not make all social activities required. I think as we're moving back into human interaction again, this won't be as big a deal, but a lot of companies were doing really nice things during the pandemic to make it more fun, scheduling, office cocktails or just fun interactions. And that's great. I think it's awesome because you want to stay engaged with your team, but sometimes people have just had enough. So you shouldn't make those mandatory, you should make them optional. Questions? That was only 30 minutes, so I talked really fast. If you don't have a question, do you have a comment to share about your experience that you think people could relate to? Because like that's what I would normally call on you guys during an actual live one and say, can you tell me a time that this has happened to you? Does anybody have anything that they want to share that's worked well for them to help them with virtual remote learning?
Christy, I want to call on you because you just spent a whole week doing virtual learning. And I feel like you probably experienced some fatigue.
Absolutely, I have. I'm just trying to think, what example can I give? Home with my son, here, which one? Because like Beth said, it is trying and it's on all ends, right? But I had, what, 4 7-hour days of Zoom from 9 to 4 all day, and it was long. The only good thing that I could appreciate is that and I was kind of checking out the dynamic of each instructor. So one instructor gave like 15-minute breaks at the top of each hour. Like they were so appreciated. And then the challenge was, because I'm at my desk, I did work on like every break we got, right? So aside if we were actually in that place having that same event in person, I had to be totally focused. So it's just overall really interesting just to see the whole dynamic, how the virtual thing is coming out.
Well, that's a great point. And actually, it's something I should have recommended, is that instead of doing traditional 30-minute and hour-long meetings for virtual, it's better to do like 20 minutes and 45 minutes so that people do have those. Just like you said, they gave you 15 minutes at the beginning. That's kind of perfect. That's exactly what research says to do. So good for them. Did they do anything to make it fun, to try to make it fun?
Yeah, like each instructor was really, really unique. So, I mean, you could tell the struggle, and some of them wanted to try to make it fun, but it was kind of like, did we really think it was fun? Because it was just like we were doing the same things over and over in the breakout group, but we see where they tried. So, I mean, you could only appreciate that because it's new for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. But it was, the classes were interesting. They were just really long. Yeah. Yeah.
So Kelly has shared that she sees a lot of these issues in her children who are exclusively remote learners this year. I didn't build this with the kids in mind, but I actually did another workshop about children. And my son was home with me all year, and he did not see another child his age for 14 months because we were so strict about the pandemic, because my parents live with me and my father has Parkinson's and leukemia. And so we just really took it seriously. And the workshops that I participated on virtual learning, what I would say is, your kids need to find an activity that they can do, no matter how strict you are. So like we started taking Archer hiking every weekend. He spends a lot of time jumping on his trampoline to give him some just like physical energy. And then also we quit being as hard on ourselves about like the judgment and the rules. So he had lots of screen time, we didn't control that iPad as strictly. Like if he wanted to go to the TV, that was fine too. If he wanted to play video games, it was fine too. We had to kind of loosen up our standards and just let them find the joy where they could find it and the energy where they could find it. And I think that is extremely challenging. We also implemented things like game night in the house. So anything you can do to kind of help feel that engagement is good for them. And then we ate dinner every night as a family also. But yes, it's extremely hard on the kids. Harder on them, I think, than the adults in a lot of ways, especially if they, like my child's an only child. So I am so happy to put him back in summer camp and like let him remember how to be around other children, because I think that was extremely challenging. So good point, Kelly. I hope that it's going better for your kids now. Any other comments or questions? So fast. I do talk really fast. Does anybody think they have it? Virtual fatigue? Christy's like, yeah, I can see Christy's face. She's like, yes, I do. Everybody would have it after a whole week of Zoom training, I think. Does anybody else have it?
I think I do. I'm just ready to be back in person.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll keep, I think this is important. I feel like I wish I could have taught this workshop, last year at this date, so that going into still heavy in the pandemic, people would have, been more aware of it and tried to be more thoughtful of how they treat themselves and their self-care. But I do think a lot of companies are going to continue to let people work remote. I think they found that it's worked, and you can pull employees from different areas. And so I think all of this stuff will still be relevant, but hopefully it won't be as extreme going forward. So, all right. If you have no questions and nobody wants to comment about their experience, then, since we've established a hybrid schedule at work, it's not as bad as it was. I find that with having Zoom meetings at work will trigger again. That makes sense. Did your child have to do Zoom all day online? Like, did they have to physically be in front of the computer all day, Kelly?
I have one child that's a rising senior and the other just finished 7th grade. So they were a little bit older. So they did have a little bit more screen time. They had their phones. It was, it was, it was terrible. There towards the end, my youngest daughter, who will thankfully be progressing to the 8th grade, we had our doubts there for a bit. It's like she just hung up the towel. She was done. She could not mentally do it anymore. And they sat there from 8:35 in the morning until 3 o'clock. And it got to the point where my youngest was literally just staring at the screen. You know,
I can't imagine. My son is just a barrel of wildness. I can't imagine him sitting still from 8:30 to 3. He's only 8, so he was in 2nd grade, but they only had Zoom in the morning for like an hour and a half to like plan their day.
yeah.
And then the rest of the day we kind of did it as we could, as long as he got his assignments done. So I do think it'd be much harder. And I think middle school is kind of the worst age.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially because I don't know if you're like me, but I can still teach my 2nd grader most of his work, except for maybe math.
Yeah, that's no longer the case. It's things have changed quite a bit since I was in school. So it's mom was more hands off, and plus I was working remotely too. So I'm in front of a computer, doing virtual meetings and making phone calls and still doing the things that I had to do, but from home while managing both of them. And I am so glad they will be going back to school this fall. Like it's just been ridiculous. But my youngest, it hit her she's super, super extroverted. And I saw a huge change in her personality, not wanting to get out of it. And I mean, middle school is garbage anyway, but
Yes.
I think the virtual learning for a school year and a quarter, it really has taken a toll on her personality. And I think that everybody in the house, even my oldest daughter who was in college on campus, all of her classes were virtual. And all of us it's like we've been in a funk. And I think it's virtual fatigue.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't mind sharing this. This is one of the things I talked about with the virtual learning workshop is I actually put my son in therapy also.
I think that's probably what we all need at this point.
So I think it really helped him to have someone outside of us that he could talk about how he was feeling and just some of the challenges. And I kind of listened to him. I took him every week for a while, and then he told me he could go less, and I took him every other, and now he goes once a month. So it's been really good for us, and there's a lot of resources around that. If you feel like you still see that struggle later, I recommend it. But I thought having children definitely made it harder, but it made it harder to work and manage remote learning and remote work. It made it easier because at least I had my child to entertain me. I wasn't just alone. I think living alone would add a whole nother level of
absolutely.
But I felt a lot of guilt, especially in the beginning, because it's one thing to leave your house and not see your child and work a 9-hour, 10-hour, 11-hour day because they understand you've left. But it was hard for Archer at age 8 to understand why I was ignoring him all day while I was in the house. Like, why do you work all the time, Mama? I was like, because it pays for our lifestyle, son. So yes, it definitely had its own interesting challenges with children. So I appreciate you sharing your experience. And by all means, the therapy has been really good for him. I think, I don't know. I think every middle schooler should just have therapy for being middle schoolers.
Yeah.
But strongly recommend that. Anybody else have any unique challenges or comments? Well, I mean, if something comes to you, again, I'm not an expert. I just committed to learning about it so I could share it with everyone. And if you come up with questions later, please feel free to contact me. I'm sure Maddie will include my information, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.